Sure. Thanks. Thanks. Okay. Hi, Sai Shankar. So, myself Shivraj. So, I will be the interviewer for you today. Okay. Okay. So, let's start with a brief introduction about yourself and your recent project.
Mhm. Okay, so starting with my education, so I completed my BTech in 2018 from New Horizon College. That's Bangalore-based college. And after my campus placement, I started working with Wipro. And in my tenure of 2.7 years, that's the overall. I have taken up various roles, starting with performance analyst, then DevOps engineer, and then and then from then I'm into development. So it's more towards Java, Spring Boot, microservices, and cloud. So the cloud infra which we were using is the Azure for most of the deployments and also the functionalities, right? And yeah, the domains which I have touched upon again varies from retail. Then I worked with real estate, logistics, and also the current project that's healthcare based one. The client being Ross Diagnostics, right? So yeah.
Okay. So, you said like different platforms you have worked on, right? So, in Java specifically, how many years of experience do you have?
So Java and the Java stack, it's 2 years.
2 years. Okay. Fine. Okay, fine. I've pinged you a Codapad link in the chat. Can you open that?
Okay, just give me 1 minute.
Yes.
Okay, just opening up. I have to give my name and login into it.
Yeah. Just the name.
Yeah.
Okay. So here I want you to complete this method. So basically, what it does is it sorts this given input string based on the number of occurrences. So for example, if you see A has occurred um, thrice, B once, C twice, and D twice, right?
Okay.
So if you see the unique values of A, B, C, D,
Mm-hmm.
B has occurred only once, so B should come first, and then C, and then D, and at the end A.
Okay.
So can you just print this output when I give this as an output? So basically, you understood, right? The unique characters.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. So I have a string, right?
Yeah.
Let me just think.
So your video is turned off?
You're not able to see?
No, actually.
Okay. Let me just turn it back on. Is it visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So probably what I can do is, let's see, I have the string. Let's call it str. So that is, let's call it. Okay. Just thinking of making that array. Okay. It doesn't shows the.
Yeah, it does show for fairly few things.
Oh, okay. Okay. Shall I then just tell the logic which I'm trying to use?
Yeah, first you can just tell the high level, like what is the algorithm you're thinking of. Then later we can start coding.
Sure. So yeah, the algorithm which I'm thinking of is, so since I'm having a string, right? So I'll convert it into an array, right?
Okay.
And array of characters, then I can sort it. So I'll actually get, okay, sorting is probably okay. Since we need okay based on the count of it, right?
Yes.
Okay, then we can do one thing. We can basically put it in a hash map, right? So
Okay.
the code will be somewhat like once the it is a character array for each character ch in the let's call it the this is the array basically, right? So what I'll be doing is um, I'll start putting it. So if my let's say I have a hash map, so that let's call it my map. If it contains that particular character, right? Say ch,
Okay.
then I'll be putting map dot put my map dot put. I'll be putting that value. So key will be the character, and then ch dot get. Sorry, yeah, so basically we'll be doing cs dot get, so it will get the value, let's say okay, sorry, map dot get ch plus 1. Yeah, so what I can do is probably this is the approach. Okay, sorry, this will be outside. Yeah, so what actually this will do is, and also there will be a else condition. So let's say my map is empty, right? So in that scenario I'm just putting the um, you know uh, my map dot put, let's say, the ch with the count, let's say 1. So this will ensure for the first time, if uh, that value comes in the character, it will put with the value as 1, and each time it reappears, right? So it will take up the value, add 1, and then you add it. So at the end of the day, I mean at the end of the loop, basically what I'll be getting is I'll have the key, let's say a, it's like 2, let's say b is 1, and c is some other value, let's say 3, right? Now what I can do is then I can just so based on the key, so whichever the key is, so I can just sort the array, I mean the hash map, right? Based on, okay, I can actually use tree only directly, so it will directly place based on so right, so this will be a tree map here, so it will actually take care of the sorting
But
anyway, right? So
tree
it will be on the key.
will sort it, right?
It will be on the key.
Yeah.
So yeah, and then we can go with linked one. So linked will ensure that okay, the insertion order is anyway maintained, and also we can then again sort it. So for sorting, based on the values, right? We can directly use the streams and then sort and get accordingly the values.
Okay. So can you try it out? Like, I think most of the code for the first half you have already written most of the code. You can
So,
just make the required changes.
yeah. So I'm
And I'm interested in the
yeah.
in the second half, like
Okay.
what you're going.
Mhm. So yeah, it's more like a pseudocode, right? So I'll just show. So let's say I have the map. So my map dot stream, right? So it will be like a stream, and then sorted. Okay, before streams, what we will be doing is we'll go with the entry set. So it will give me the entry set, and on the entry set I'll be streaming. So here, let's say we make it, so we'll be streaming that, and in the entry set stream, so we'll get the values, um, get values. So once I get the values, I'll stream it, and then in the sorted I'll specify, so there was this comparator. Yeah, inside the comparator we can actually specify by values, right? So like we can do it by values, right? And at the end I can then collect it to collectors dot list, sorry, not list, I need it as a to map. Inside that I have to specify my key and value, right? So it can be in form of key, and So yeah, somewhat like this only we can do.
Okay. Okay. Fine. We will come back to this later. Okay. The later point of time. So to start with, are you aware of OOPS concepts in Java?
Yeah.
Okay. So what is polymorphism?
Okay. So polymorphism is again a part of OOPS concepts which we use in Java in order to design and develop the code. So when I say polymorphism, so basically it is the ability of one object to exist in multiple states. So it can be even more derived further to one object having more than one hash relationships. So when I say polymorphism, yeah, so we have two types. So it can be a static or it can be a dynamic. So they are also known as the compile time and the runtime, namely the overloading and overriding respectively. So when I say method overloading, it's more like just based on the signature. So in the signature, let's say the parameters are changing, the number of parameters are changing, or the type is changing. Accordingly, the function calls will be made. And also we have the overriding on the other hand, which is more dynamic in nature. So it actually comes as a part of the inheritance under the inheritance topic. So once a subclass actually inherits, let's say, the parent class, and it has to override a method. So what will happen is, if then for the same naming method, it will like override and give its own implementation to it. So we can give the annotation as that override on it, and then
Okay, okay. So in the CoderPad itself, if you see at the end, I have this code. Okay. So basically, there's an animal class which has a method called as eat, and it prints animal eat. So don't worry about the syntaxes here. It's just printing animal eat. And similarly, we have a cat class which extends the animal, and it also has eat method and sleep method. Okay. So now I want you to tell me the output for these three situations. One is in the line number 40, and then 43, 44, 47, 48.
Okay.
What would be the output of this?
Okay. For the new one. Okay. I'm just writing the output.
Yeah.
Let me come to the explanation in a short span of time. Okay. Yeah. So this is because obviously we have a standalone class calling its own method, right? So it will print the animal eat. And coming to the second part of it, so we have the animal A1 new cat. So basically, we are using the parent reference to create a child class, right? So eat, since eat is already given, we have a overriding kind of a thing. So like it's already overridden and we have a value. So the output will be actually come from the cat eat, and then we have the sleep. So a1 dot sleep. Okay, actually this will throw an error probably, because when we are using the animal, I mean the parent reference, only we can call the parent methods, but here it is not there, so it will be a C. I mean the compile time error. And yeah, again, since it is the C, right? So we are using the same class. It's a standalone class. It will call its own, cat eat, and for the sleep, it will be the cat sleep.
Okay. Okay. Fine. And are you aware of composition in Java?
Compositions, not really.
Okay. Are you aware of solid principles?
Yeah, like I read back then. So it's the single responsibility, the open close, of that one, right?
Yeah. So what do you mean by can you explain any two of them? Like anyone, any two of them, your wish.
Okay. Yeah. So single responsibility is more towards one class should be specific to one functionality, right? Rather than focusing on multiple things. So it is more to, so when we say solid principles, they are more like blueprint towards the design of an application.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. So in the solids, I mean the S that stands for the single responsibility. So it's like the class should only have one responsibility, and it should not be focusing on other things. Then we have the open closed. Open, it should, I mean the class should be open for extending it, but again closed for the modifications, right? So these two I remember, I can recall these two only right now.
Okay, there is one more called as interface segregation. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, so interface segregation, so it's more like the decoupling of the application. So we can use like the interfaces and
Mhm.
probably extend it and then sorry, implement it and then give the definition to it.
Okay. So are you aware of immutability in Java?
Yeah. So immutability is basically a property of a class wherein the state of that particular object of that particular instance and for that class won't be changing, right? So strings are a very good example of immutable class, right? So
Okay. Suppose I have a class like this in line number 51. It's a student class. Okay. It has name, roll number, age, and marks.
okay.
So I want to make it an immutable class. So how can I do it? Can you do this? Can you
Yeah,
make this
yeah,
as an
yeah.
immutable class?
Okay. So the idea of making them is we'll start with making the class final, right? So it will ensure that okay, it cannot be extended further down the line and make all the fields final and private, uh, right? So we'll make all the fields private and final. Yeah, and giving while we'll specify the getters and setters. So we won't be actually giving the setters, but we'll be only writing all the getters here for
Okay.
right. And since it's a map, so we can actually go with the unmodifiable map, right? So that's from the collections, because array list also, let's say here we had a array list kind of a scenario. Though it is even if I specify it as a final, it won't be actually a final, but we can still get the values and then modify it. So we always go with the collections. They have the unmodifiable set wherein we can use those here. So that's the way probably I'll be making
Okay.
this class final.
Okay. So what about like creating the class? What about the constructor? Do we need
Uh,
a constructor or not?
yes, we will need a constructor. So what we will be doing is we'll have a we'll actually make a parameterized one, right? So let's say I have student, and then I'll be taking those values, string and all those values here, and then inside that this dot those values equal to the ones that are coming from the parameter, right? And accordingly it will set. So basically what will happen is once I create the object, so that state should be there. I mean, it won't be changing, right? And anyway, I don't have the setters and all the fields are private, so anyway we cannot access it either. Only, I mean,
Okay.
for the right operation.
Okay. Suppose I have this list of students, right? I have 3, 4 students like this.
Okay.
Let me type here. Okay. There are 3 students, and I have added it to the student list. Okay. Suppose I want to sort this student by their name.
Okay.
So do I need to do any additional things in the student class or not? How do I sort it based on only name?
Okay. So yeah, so we are actually talking of sorting, right? So whenever I say sorting, there comes in two things. Actually one thing, but again, the other one actually just comes along with it. So we have the equals, and then we have the hash code, right? So equals is what we are really concerned here. So when I say equals, the idea of having an equal is actually it's a part of the object class, which is the superclass of all the basic objects. And the default implementation is it will actually take up the reference of that particular variable and then compare it. But since we have a object which is, and we wanted to have, let's say, a custom like the implementation we have to give. So we usually since you are saying, let's say we want let's say name or something like that, so we define r equals, right? And once these two are done, right, so the hash code and equals are done. So next step is the collections. So we'll use, let's say it was a list. So collections dot sort, we will be going ahead with it. In the sort, I'll first of all specify the list. So that is my element, and actually the second parameter will be a comparator object, right? So
Okay.
now there is the primitive way of doing it is again create a class which will be implementing it, but we have the Java way of doing it, so I'll do it that way. So let's take, we have I1 comma I2. So I'll be using a tertiary operator here, and so what it will be actually doing is it will compare first of all I1 dot get name, you know, dot get name. Then okay, since these are strings, so we can directly use compare to, right? Get name, and then compare to I2 dot get name, and then if it is true, then I'll be uh, actually it will return values. So based on like compare to is from the string class, but yeah, so if it is actually greater, then it will be returning 1. If it is small, so that will be the other condition. We can check here again the same thing, and let's say I1 dot you know get name, and then again I'll be comparing here. Let's say okay, actually it will be returned compare actually itself returns the values. So based on that we can pretty much do it. So, yeah. This we actually take if we have integers and all. So let's say I have the get name here, and sorry, yeah, comparing it to here. So if it is greater, right, so it will be 1, or else if not, then it can be -1. If so, right, so, or at the end we can have it as 0. So what actually it does is it will compare, and if it is 1, then okay, we have to give it, sorry.
You meant equal to 1.
Yeah. No, actually, what happens is it will compare, and it will fetch me the value. If it is true, then it will give me 1. If not, it is like -1, and if if they are equal, then it will actually give me 0. So based on that, so basically it's similar to writing our own way of doing it, right? So let's say we have let's say we did it with the old way of doing it. So we'll be having a class, let's say some comp one, and that is implements the comparator, right? So in that I'll be specifying the Pojo. So here let's say I needed the student class. I'll specify the student, and inside that I'll get the definition to my compare method, and right, so here it can take, let's say, student 1 and student 2, and then we can just return let's say if it was on the name, so we can just return student 1 dot okay, it's like student 1 dot get name, right, dot, which will be compared to the so compared to this one is again from the string class. So we have the student 2 dot get name. So yeah, this also pretty much does the same thing, and then I can pass let's say I have a comp object, I can just pass it here in the sort second parameter. So that also pretty much works.
Okay. So yeah, fine. So are you aware of serialization in Java?
Yeah, so serialization, so basically we have a serialization class. So sorry, actually it's an interface, which basically they are marker interfaces, which is more used for tagging, right? So we don't really have any methods inside it. But yeah, so the idea of serialization is to basically we use serialization in a scenario wherein we want one object, and let's say I'm sending it through a network or some database layer or something like that. So I cannot directly send it. So what I'll be doing is I'll serialize it. So when I say serialize it, so we'll have an intermediate representation of it, and we can then further down the street we can deserialize it and get the object, right? So how can we actually do is quite this way. So we'll have the class. Let's say the first thing, the requirement is make the class. Let's say I have the class X, which will be implements serializable. Okay, so don't know my spellings.
Yeah, no issues.
Yeah, it will be implementing that, and then I'll have certain values int1 and intb or something like that. Then there is a scenario where I don't want my intc to be serialized, then I can just make it like transient as well. It will be transient here. And yeah, so I'm pretty much done with my class here. So let's say I wanted to, let's say now serialize this particular instance of this particular class. So what I'll be doing is, let's say I have a file output stream, output stream. So let's say I'll just, let's say file something, new file output stream, output stream. So I can just specify the path of that particular file, and then what I'll be doing is, then I'll again create an object, output stream object. So let's say out new object output stream, something like this, and then pass down the value as file. Right. So now what I'll be doing is, I'll be using this particular out. Okay, we cannot use. Yeah. So out1 dot write write object, and then we can specify, let's say the object was, let's say some y value or something like that. So we'll directly specify. So this way, yeah, we can serialize the object. And again, we also
and
have.
what about there is a serial version?
Yeah.
Right?
I was coming to
is
that.
the
I was coming to that. So actually, that is used. It's more like an identifier for the serialization and the deserialization to happen. If we don't use it, let's say in a normal scenario we don't use it, then if I'm trying to serialize it, JVM actually creates it in by itself for us if it is serializing. But in case let's say we like we forgot to give it or something, and I'm making sure that okay, some wrong value actually goes in, so we'll have one exception coming up there, right? So in order to make sure, so it is a general good practice to have it, because how actually JVM creates that is based on the structure of the class. So let's say even if I change any of them here and there, probably my serial ID would also change. So yeah, so that's with the serial ID.
Suppose if a parent class is serialized, will the child also be serialized automatically or not?
No, need not be. It's not required. But yeah, so but if there is a scenario wherein we have a dependency, interdependency, let's say I have another class object here, some, let's say some B class object, B object, some B, let's say some video, some BC, something, some name. Yeah. So, but this has to be serialized, or else again it will throw an error.
Okay, fine. Okay, fine. And what about exception handling? How often you are like handling the exceptions and other stuff in your program?
So in my project, so basically we are using Spring Boot. So in the Spring Boot, we have the typical REST controllers and all. Then we have the service layer here. So talking of the exceptions, mostly the exception will occur in my service layer. So the approach which we take is, so we use the @controller advice, and also we have @exception handler. So this is the Spring Boot way of doing it. So basically three things we require. So the first one is we'll have the exception. So let's call it some example. Let's say item not found exception. So this will be my first exception. So I need the first custom exception class, and then I need the payload. So payload is basically something that will be sent to the user, a client, through the once the transaction is done. So payload I can include, let's say, the message. Then I can give a status code there, right? And if I want, let's say, the time zone, stamps or zone time, that I can also give. So this is the payload which will be sent back to the user, and it will be usually sent as a response entity, right? So it will be sent as a response entity, wherein I'll be I'll be putting this particular payload here, payload, and also the status, right? So, and also I have the handler, exception handler. So I'll have the exception handler, let's call it the API exception handler or something like that. So this is where I'll be basically mapping it. So after mapping it, after giving the annotations, that is the exception handler. I have to annotate that particular method which will be handling that particular. So inside that, I again specify all the possible exceptions that can happen. So let's say I had this exception right here, item not found exception dot class. So the same will come here in the bracket, so that it will tell, okay, if this happens, then throw the same one, right? So it's more like to handle it. And at the end, yeah, I'll be returning here that response entity. So this is the way we do it in our project.
Okay. Okay. So like there are checked and unchecked exceptions, right?
Yeah.
What is the difference between those two?
Okay, so based on the scenario and requirement, we'll be using either of them. So when I say checked, so these are the compile time exceptions which can be checked during the compilation itself. And then we have the other category, so that is the runtime exception, also known as the unchecked ones. So from the hierarchy, so we have the exception, right? So exception is actually extended by the runtime exceptions. So they do have their own, unique characteristics. So when I say exceptions, they are like the compile time one, so the checked ones, and the runtime is the unchecked ones. And talking of when they occur, so runtime exceptions occur during the runtime of the program. So let's say I'm trying to going through some IO kind of an operation and the file is not found, so that is an example of runtime exception. And then there can be scenario wherein the exception which can be checked during the compilation itself. So example can be the divide by zero operation. So that will give me the arithmetic one, right? So these are with the exceptions. But again, let's say there is a method. If it is, there is a possibility that one statement might throw, the checked one. So probably for the exceptions, the checked ones, we have to actually specify it in the method signature itself. So example can be, let's say I have a scenario where I'm inside some method one, and so there are some couple of statements, and these statements might throw exception which is actually a checked one. So I have to give it like throws, and then I have to specify the exception that it will be, this might throw. And but for the runtime exceptions, yeah, we don't have to do the all these things, right? So most of the transactions that happen in our at least application, most of them are runtime exceptions, because data might be not found in the DB or something like that, right? So usually we go with runtime, but yeah, we can use exceptions as well.
Okay, fine. So collections, when it comes to collections, like what are the collections you have used?
Yeah, so collections, again, it's a way we visualize the data structures in Java. So it facilitates that. And the ones which I have used is lists, sets, and map to the most use. It's very unlikely I have worked on it, but again, talking of them, so list, map, and the sets are basically interfaces. But they actually implement the collections. So map actually is kept aside, and talking of why it is being done is because the idea of having an interface is to give the facility. Basically, it will be having those methods which are common to certain classes, right? So, but map and the list and the other ones, they are little segregated for the same reason, because map has the other way of doing it. Right, so we don't go with the add methods and all, we rather go with the put ones. So yeah, so that is there with it. But again, coming back to the list, so we have the classes which will be implementing them. So we have the array list, we have the linked list, we have vector. So that vector is again a legacy class.
So array list and linked list, right? So what is the decision point you will do when you want to choose between these two, array list and linked list?
The decision point will be based on my requirement. So when I say requirement, if I need a scenario wherein I have a lot of insertions and deletions, in that scenario I'll go with the linked list. And the reason being insertion and deletion, right? So that's a lot more easier in linked list, because we'll be only manipulating the pointers there. But talking of the array list, internally what it does is it will be actually shifting the elements here and there, right? So in order to do that, again, there is a memory consumption, because a temporary array will be used, right? So that is the point wherein, so if my requirement is insertion and deletion, my go will be linked list. But if there is a scenario wherein it's more towards the fetching of data, right? And let's say I want to get some value or something like that, then yeah, I'll go with array list, because indexing is quite nicely done in the array list. So that these will be basically my deciding factors.
Okay. So what is the difference between linked hash set and a tree set?
Okay, so again, both of them are set, so they implement the set interface, and the difference comes down to the way they do things. So when I say linked hash set, so internally linked hash set will be using the hash set, and hash set internally uses the hash map for the transactions. And what actually it does is it will be inserting the values, but again it will make sure the insertion order is maintained in the linked hash set, and also it will be unique values will only be accepted. So how the unique is again done is because we are using the map and the keys will be always unique there, so it takes care of it. But again, yeah, talking of the tree map, yeah, so sorry, the tree sets. So tree set, what actually does is it will be using we call it like it will be like in a sorted way, so unique elements which are sorted. And even if we want to do a custom sorting based on our requirements, let's say we have a student object and all, then we can again go with the approach of collection start, give the element and then the filtering criteria, right? So like that.
Okay. And coming to hash map, right?
Mhm.
Like suppose I want to use, you have used string or a character or an integer as a key, right?
Mhm.
Suppose I want to use a class, an object, my custom object like student
Mhm.
as a key
Mhm.
for my hash. So
Okay.
do I need to do any changes in the student class, or I can use any class as in?
Actually, we can use any classes, but there is a very important requirement that we have to take care, and that is the implementation of equals and hash code there. Because if we don't override these two methods and then directly go, so this will actually bring inconsistency, because the maps actually use the hash code in order to put the values, place the values in the segments. So basically, we'll be having an array of associations which will be a key and value pair, right? So in order to do that, so yeah, so basic requirement is yes, we need to override these two methods.
Can you explain like how internally hash map works? When you say put
Yeah.
key comma value, right?
Mhm.
And then when you say get, so what exactly happens?
Okay.
Internally?
Yeah. Okay. So talking of the hash map, so yeah, it will. So if we have to actually visualize it, we can see it like we'll have an array. Let's say we have a vertical array. So we actually call it the segments. So usually, if we create, let's say, a new hash map constructor, so it actually creates an array of 16 values, wherein the load factor will be of 0.75. So when I say load factor, it's more towards the, if that much percentage has already been filled up, then extend the size. Okay, we'll come to that later, but again, yeah, so we have that thing there. So we have our segments ready. Then now let's say I want to do a put operation. So what actually it will do is it will take the value, calculate the hash code for that particular object, right? And then once the hash code has been calculated, it will do a bitwise and with the n minus 1. So let's say I have 16 as my number. So these are the number of 16 segments, right? So it will do a and operation, right? And then it will play. So we'll get a value there. So that will be basically the index for that particular bucket. So let's say I got an index of 2. So in my the segment, the second bucket will be then placed with the object. And then there might be a scenario wherein we might see a collision kind of a thing. So if collision happens, then in that scenario, what actually will be done on the same segment, we will be having an array list which will be taking sorry, we will have a linked list which will take care of all the values. But I think in the Java 8 they have optimized it. So now we have the BSTs there, right, self-validating BSTs, which will actually hold down the hash code. So nodes will have the hash codes there, and then based on that we will be getting the value. So how the get operation again works is similar way. We'll have firstly we'll go and get the hash code. So hash code we will get, then we will do the AND operation, I mean the bitwise AND operation. We'll get the segment where we have to get it, will go to the value, check the hash code. Okay, so we'll first check with the value of the incoming object and the existing object. If the value is a match, well and good, return it. If not, If not comes actually in a case where there is a collision and already a linked list is existing there. So in there it will again go to the next value. Hash code will be same, but yeah, value will be again matched. If the value is same, then it will be returned. So that's with the get off.
Okay. Okay. So have you used any concurrent hash map? Like how it works?
Yeah. So when I say actually in our project, we the whole project doesn't use any multi-threading, so concurrency is not something comes into the picture. But yeah, theoretically, so actually it came as a part of 1.5 Java, wherein it came into the concurrency package. So the idea of having the concurrency was to optimize the transactions that are being done on the hash set. So we have like two options: either we can go with the hash table, or we can use or else we can make the hash set synchronized. But hash table is again a very primitive way of doing it. So we have the concurrent hash map. So what happens is, again, we have the same segments. Initial size will be 16, a load factor 0.75, and then what happens here is the catch being each segment will have its own lock. So basically, let's say there is one. Let's say we have 16 threads. They are trying to access this particular hash, the concurrent hash map. So what will happen is, only for the write operations on that particular segment, it has to acquire the lock, or else for all the read operations it can directly go and fetch the value. So basically at one time I am facilitating 16 threads to operate and get do the operations. So that is what concurrency is. That, I mean, that's the way wherein concurrency is handled. Because if I do the same thing by trying to make a hash map synchronized or something like that, what will happen is all the segments will be locked by one thread at a given point of time. So that's the way they improvement is optimized.
Okay. Like, what are fail fast and fail safe iterators?
Yeah, so okay, starting with the fail fast. So these are basically the iterators. Let's say I'm iterating through, in one collection, and, structurally they have been, modified. So what will happen is I'll get, error. So basically an exception. So that is like the concurrent modification exception. So what it simply does is, so there will be a mod count. So every time, the has next operation is done, if the mod count is increased, or that's basically like a flag. So if the flag value changes, it will throw that exception, or else it doesn't. So then the other thing is the fail safe, right? The fail safe is the one wherein, rather than working on that directly on the data structure, we'll be actually making a copy and then work on it, right? So any changes will be done on the copy and not on the the original one.
Okay. And okay, so multi-threading. So you said in your project you have not used multi-threading, right? So like, have you not used it any time? And what is your knowledge on multi-threading?
Yeah, so I do hold knowledge, but not from the project point of view. So starting with the multi-threading, like the way we create threads, right? Thread runnable and the thread class, but then we have the executor service.
What are the two ways which we can create a thread?
Yeah, so we have actually two approaches. Yeah, so we have two approaches. Actually these are the old ways of doing it, but again, yeah. So starting with the extending the thread class, and then we have the implementing of runnable, right? So these are the two ways wherein if, let's say, if I take the implementation way of doing it, then again I have the liberty to do multiple inheritance there, but it's limited in thread class extension. But yeah, so these are like the two ways. And in suppose if I go with the second one, though, I can just give my implement over. I have to override the run method in case if I'm using the runnable, and then give my own running logic, right? So that is one thing. And that's again it's a lot primitive way of doing it. We have the executor service now, so I can just create my own thread pool. So rather than we creating from from scratch, the executor service will pretty much take care of all the pool and all. So we can make like various pools. We can like create else simply specify executor service is equal to new fixed thread pool of 10. So that will create 10 threads, right? And then I can use the service.execute. So when I say service.execute, it will actually run that particular method. So if we are going with the newer approach of like, let's say I'm using the Java 8, so I can directly use the lambdas and then I can do it. And also we have the callable interface. So the limitation of runnable is being, we just have, I mean, the run method is basically a void method, so it doesn't returns anything. So we go with the callable there. So we can use the call method in order to go with the call method. So we'll be using the service dot submit. We can submit them, and yeah, and also we have something called as the future. That is more to optimize the way threads are being handled. So let's say there is a scenario wherein I have let's say I have to do some operation on an object, right? And what I'll be actually doing is I'll have a future. So future what ensures is it's more like a placeholder and a promise that okay, you just execute the code and I'll hold the value once it is done, and the flow goes on. So that it's not like a blocking kind of a thing. So it doesn't blocks the flow, right? And then yeah, so we do have futures, but again they have, yeah, let's say I have to check if my transaction has been done. So I'll use is done. If is done is a boolean kind of a thing, so it will check if it is done, then get the value. So getting is more like a fetching the output of it. But yeah, so there is one catch to it. Future has its own limitations again. Suppose there is a scenario wherein I want complete asynchronous way of programming kind of a thing I want, then in that scenario I'll go with the completable future, because future, even let's say there is a scenario wherein we have the internal object dependency. Internal dependency is there for an object. Let's say there are 5 steps to be processed on one object. Let's say take the object, then do this, then do a payment kind of a thing, then do something else. So in that scenario, object is required for all the calls. So basically we cannot chain the future operation. So we have the completable future. So we can supply it asynchronously, specify the thread pool where we want it to execute, and then we can use the then apply method, and then at the end we can just get the value, right? So that's with the threading.
Okay. And the traditional way of creating a thread, right? Can you write a simple code?
Yeah.
Of creating a thread
Yeah, sure.
and then running that.
Okay, so let's say I have a class thread class. Okay, it will be basically extends the thread, and then so yeah, I'll have my values here, and then let's say I have the another class wherein I have the main method. So inside my main, what I'll be doing is, if I'm taking the thread approach, then I just have to create a thread object. Thread, let's say thread 1. Okay, I can use the thread class here. Sorry. Let's call the thread class. Then yeah, the new I can just create one more of this particular class here, and then I can just do a thread 1.start, right? So it will take care of it. But again here I can actually, in the thread class, let's say I have a run method. So inside the run, whatever the code that will get executed. So this is the one approach of doing it, and then we have the second way of doing it. So there will be, I'll be implementing let's say I have another thread class, so I'll be implements the runnable, and inside that I will have the same things. Here I have to mandatorily override it, right? So override the run method, and then yeah, it's the same thing, main method. So inside the main, I can directly go with the the thread class object, create one. Let's say it's equal to new, and I'll create that particular object here. Then yeah, so here what I have to do is, again I have to take one thread class, let's say t1, and in the new of thread I'll basically pass the object. So it's like a runnable object I'll be passing here. So let's say th1. So this is also one way, or else I can directly use the thread, and then I can also do like a new runnable instance I can make, or directly in the lambda way I can directly specify do something. So this also pretty much does the same job.
Okay. And suppose I have some code like this. Okay. So, just a minute. I have this class, account class. Okay. It has a balance. Okay. And it has two methods. One is to deposit the amount. So suppose someone adds like some 1,000 rupees, it just goes and adds it to the balance. Okay. Then there is a withdraw method. So,
Mhm.
but with this withdraw method, what we need to do is we need to check if balance is less than or equal to 0, and also maybe another check to say if the balance and withdraw amount are like matching. If like
Mhm.
someone is not asking me to withdraw some more amount or something like that, and we
Okay.
need to throw an exception. All else we sleep off some time and we will withdraw that amount, right?
Mhm.
Suppose there are two threads accessing the same object of this class,
Mhm.
then and they're trying both are trying to withdraw the amount. So do you see any issues with this withdraw method, and how can it be solved?
Okay. Yes, there will be an issue, and the issue is what we call as the producer-consumer problem, right? So what actually will be happening here is though so basically there will be two different threads accessing it at different point of time. So there is a scenario wherein it will be intermediately it will be have some operation will be going on, and the other thread actually tries to access it, right? So in that scenario what we can do is we can actually make it synchronized, right? So I can
Mhm.
just make this balance synchronized, right? So it will ensure that at given point of time only one thread is accessing it, right? So probably this we can do.
Okay, you like make the balance attribute synchronized or the method level synchronization?
Okay, we can actually make the methods also synchronize. Yeah. Okay, we can actually do one thing. We can just make this as volatile. So it will make sure the all the operations done on the balance are from the main memory, and not
Okay,
from the thread stack, and we can make these synchronized. So the method synchronized and make the variable volatile.
okay. And are you aware of logs? Thread
Logs,
log?
logs you mean from the application?
I mean the reentrant log or read write logs in multi-threading.
Okay, logs you are telling. Okay, log.
Yeah, yeah.
No, not really.
Okay. And
Though we, I mean, basically we can use like the weight and all for the locking
mhm,
mechanism. So we have the weight method. So let's say I can use weight method on an object, so it will ensure that okay, this particular object is locked as of now, and the thread cannot access it, right? So let's say I use
mhm.
then the notify. So if I use the notify, it will notify the other thread which is basically waiting for this particular resource, right? And if I use like notify also, all the threads will be notified that okay, this resource is available. So that one, yeah, I
Okay. So what are the design patterns like Django 4 design patterns you are aware of?
Yeah, so usually what happens is, most of the design patterns are come to us as a part of our LLD, wherein it will be given and specified for one particular service, and usually these are taken care by the senior developers. But again, I did get a chance to work on some of them. So design patterns again, they are basically solution to a common problem that is understandable by the architects and the developers, right? So we have like three types. So we have the creational, we have the structural, then we have the behavioral, right? But yeah, so I have worked on creational ones, and the ones which I have used, they are like three. So the first one
Mm-hmm.
being the singleton, and then we have the second
Mm-hmm.
one that is, we have this the factory, right? So we have the factory design pattern, and then the third one which I worked was the abstract factory. So the scenarios wherein I took up these is like in the singleton. So there was a class wherein we just wanted one instance of it because we were using it for caching, right? So that was like a location class. I just wanted one location object to be existence in my program, and every time, let's say, even if a new location is added, it will go and actually update my Redis cache, right? So that is the reason why we had like one singleton there, and
Mm-hmm.
that was with the singleton, and then we have the
Can you
factory.
like write a simple singleton class?
Yeah. Okay. So basically, there are certain steps to make it, so let's say I have the class, let's call it the singleton class, right? So firstly, what we do is um, you know, we create a static instance of it. So the instance will be singleton. Uh, let's call the singleton class, class vj is equal to new singleton class, something like this, right? So it will be an object will be there, and then we'll have a get instance method. So what I'll be doing is I'll be returning um, this instance, so that is the obj, right? So and also we have to make the constructor private, so it will ensure that new operator cannot be again used, and this method also will be static because we are accessing static context, right? So this is the basic one of singleton.
Okay. Okay. Fine. What you understand about factory design pattern?
Yeah, so when I say factory, I'll tell you the scenario wherein we use. Okay, is my video visible?
Yeah, it's visible. I
Oh.
just not turned off.
Oh, okay. I thought maybe no issues.
No.
Yeah. So so talking about the factory, the scenario wherein we used was for one of the services. The service itself being the email service. So what happens is we'll be having we are actually using the event hubs. So event hubs are used for message queuing in Azure, right? So let's say there is some transaction happened and I have to trigger an email. So each email has a key associated with it. Let's say there is a registration key. So what that does is it will basically give me back body template that will be given to a customer for that particular transaction, right? So what we did was we had the factory class, which based on the particular key, it actually goes and then gets the email object, right? So that this is the way which we implemented like the factory class. So the idea of factory is rather than directly going and fetching the objects, we will actually try to the we'll request it to the factory and it will internally go and then fetch the object for us.
Okay. So what was the other one you talked about?
The other one,
factory, right?
yeah. So it's actually when I say abstract factory pattern, it's more like let's say we have the same factory pattern on a different levels, right? It's more like how the caching, we have L1 L2 caching kind of a thing. So it's somewhat like that, right? So we have a hierarchy of operations, right? So we can let's say okay, I can give you one example. Let's say let's say I have a profession and there can be two different professions. So it can be a teacher, it can be an engineer, but again inside the engineer there can be different other roles, right? So let's say I want to get that particular one, so I cannot directly go, I mean in one shot. So I have to use like intermittently it will go and bring me value. So that is what abstract factory is. Even the email services actually uses the abstract only, but again after the factory pattern only the abstract came into the picture. So
Okay. So what are the databases you have used?
So I have worked on the Azure native database, so that is the Cosmos DB. So it's a NoSQL database, right?
Okay. SQL databases, are you aware of SQL databases, queries, and other stuff?
Not really. I have completely worked on NoSQL. So we use the JPA to do all the transactions. So we have the document because Cosmos DB is more like document DB, right? So we'll directly annotate the POJO with add document, and the repository will be extending the CRUD document repository, specify, give the POJO partition key, and then write all the functions, right? So methods can be in a typical JPA way of writing it, find by some ID or something like that, and it all usually it will be returning me the list of that particular Pojo, right? And then we will further do some transaction on it. And let's say there might be scenario wherein we want a custom JPA, so we go with the at query, and inside the value I'll be specifying the SQL, but that's very minimal, like we hardly ever have done that.
Okay, writing the queries and
Yeah.
right? Are you aware of joins? Okay, SQL you are not aware of.
Yeah.
Okay, no issues. You are aware of NoSQL. Like, what is the advantage you think with your experience of using a NoSQL database?
Okay. Advantages which I feel are pretty much the known facts actually. So starting with the way structuring happens, right? So when I say a table, it's more like a relational database, right? So in a relational database, we have a lot of tables. Each table has a unique structure, right? So it has, let's say, certain rows, certain columns, and all that. But again, talking of the NoSQL, as the name suggests, we don't have any SQL query processing language for it as such. So the data is basically unstructured here. But it also brings one nice advantage to it, that we don't really have to uh, have a unique way of doing it. I mean, I can just create the Pojo the way I want it to be, right, from the design point of view. And also accessing them again, so how the Cosmos DB actually work is, so they will be having the indexing is done based on the containers. So we'll have a lot of containers. Inside the containers I'll have items, and each item will be having a specific ID to it. So usually this ID is something that is generated by default, or else if in a program, like in our program, we do have a method which will generate the UID, which will ensure that this value is unique, right? So that's there with the Cosmos. And again, the another advantage is we don't really write the SQL queries, right? So we can directly use the JPA notation and then directly fetch the value, which pretty much helps the user. Also, the most of the JDBC connections stuff and all is quite made easier here. We just have to give the connection string and also the SAS key. So SAS key, it's pretty much like a username and password kind of a thing to access that particular database, right? And then directly we can use it, right? So yeah, then again it does bring some disadvantages along with it, and the biggest disadvantages in NoSQL, which I feel, is from the designing point of view. So whenever I am designing a service and it's the Pojo, I have to make sure that it will have values, or I mean the fields should be consistent, right? So it's not like I can just create a JSON body just like that. I need some specific I have to plan it, and then accordingly I have to set these values, right? So from design point of view, yes, there are certain challenges in it, but not from the implementation and usage. So these are what I feel.
Okay. Have you used any messaging services?
Yeah, so we not that one, but yeah, so Azure gives its own messaging service, so that is the event hubs. So event hubs are basically just the way we know the servicing, I mean message servicing to be, right? So what actually it does is we'll have a sender and then we again have a receiver. So what will happen is that, let's say there is one service which did certain task, and it has to indicate to the other service that okay, this task has been done. So in order to send a message, we will use the event hubs, right? So event hubs configuration is a lot more easier. First of all, we create the resource in Azure portal, and then get the connection string, configure it in the YAML file, and then directly use it. So we just have to create the event hub. Let's say I created one class of audit, so audit will have audit event hub sender. Create an object to it, send the message, give the URL where it wants to hit, right? Or else you can directly give the box wherein you want to drop a message, right? So there will be the sender receiver will be on the other end, wherein it will be actually polling it, and it will pull the message box and it will get the message, and then perform whatever transaction it has to do after that. So some simplest example which I was telling is the email service. So for let's say there is a new device that has been registered to my system, so it has to trigger one mail to the admin that okay, the device has been successfully installed. So in that scenario, once my registration is completed, a sender will send basically a message to the email service. Okay, so this is the device registration key. The service, then there will be a receiver. So once it receives the key, and based on the key, it will then further get me the body of that particular mail and then send it. So
Okay. Okay, fine. So, like, which version of Java you have used? Java 8, you're comfortable, right?
yeah,
Java 8.
Java 8. Yeah.
So, what are functional interfaces?
Yeah, so functional interfaces are basically interfaces, as the name suggests. But there is a catch to it, and the catch being there will be only one method inside it, so we cannot have more than one method. Though we can have multiple default methods inside it, but yeah, only one method will be there, right? And also the examples are like the runnable and callable are one of the examples, and we also have four different other the commonly used ones. So I'll talk about it. But yeah, let's say I want to create my own custom one, then I just have to create the interface, have one method inside it, annotate it with functional interface. That's not mandatory, but again, it's more like a check to ensure, like only one method is there, right? So the idea of functional interfaces were to create, facilitate the functional programming, because lambdas they usually go along with the functional interfaces. Let's say we didn't have functional interfaces, probably a new class or something like that has to be created for the lambdas, which they avoided, and ensure the backward compatibility. So that's the reason why functional interfaces came into the picture. And then we have the other four types. There are others, but again, the major four ones are the predicate, the function, the consumer, the producer. So the consumer will consume a value, as the name suggests. It will take a value. So it has a accept method in it. Then we have the predicate. So predicate is used for testing something. So it has a test method inside it. And then we have the consumer. Sorry, we have the producer. So producer is more like it will help you fetch some value, right? So we have the get method inside it, and then we have the function. So function is more like it takes a value, does some changes to it, and then returns the value. So even in streams we have various methods, they actually use them. So filter uses the predicate, and the map uses the function, right? So these kind of things.
Okay, good. And you mentioned about default methods, right? So,
Mhm.
what are the default methods, and why do you think these came into picture?
So default methods actually came into Java as a evolution to the existing infra that was given to the interfaces. So interfaces, as we know, are used to visualize the 100% abstraction in Java. So let's say now I have an interface, and it has, let's say, 5 methods, and there are some 100 classes which are implementing it. Now there might be a need for one class wherein I need one specific method. So if I put that particular method inside my interface, the rest 99 will be broken down, right? Because they have to again give some dummy implementation to them. So that's the reason they gave default methods. So default methods, we just have to specify default and give some definition to it. Yeah, so there is a catch to it. Yeah, we can give the definition now to these. So they are usually the dummy methods which can be used and cannot be used based on the requirement.
Okay. So, what are optionals? Why did they come into picture?
So optional also came into Java 8. So there were scenarios wherein we always have to check the null values, right? So optional ensures that null checks can be avoided and all. So we have various method is present, off method also we can use, right? So that's with the optional.
Okay. And coming to the coder pad, suppose we have a list of students right here. Where did we have the list? In line number 71, we had the list of students, right?
71. Okay, yeah.
Student list. So I want you to make use of streams, and I want you to filter out only the students whose age is greater than 20. And I want you to collect only the student names, not the student object.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, let's say I have the student list with me. So I'll stream, then filter. So inside the filter, I'll specify ss dot get name, right? So the get age, right?
Yeah, page.
Age, yeah, get age. Um, you know, if it is, let's say, greater than some number.
Yeah, some 20, any number.
20, okay. So this will be my predicate here, right? And then I have to collect it, right? Only the names. Okay. Okay, only on the names. So usually we collected, collectors and then collections to list or something, but yeah.
Okay, this will actually collect all the student objects, right?
Yeah.
I want to collect only the names.
Okay. Is it okay if I just print the names? Like, we can do the
No. I want it to be collected in a list.
Okay. For each. Okay.
So, are you aware of this method like map?
Okay, map. Yeah.
What it does, the map?
So we can actually basically it uses the function, right? So we can specify, we can use the method reference and call a method, right? It is mostly used for the transformation, right? So
can we use that in this case? Transformation, right? That is what I need.
Okay, yeah. I don't exactly remember the syntax, but yeah, so we can use. To string.
Okay, no issues. And then suppose you have a dot collect or something like that, right? No. For example, we don't have a dot collect or any terminal operations, right? It just ends here. So does JVM evaluate this expression or no?
Evaluates in the sense?
Will it do the filter and map and keep that value, store it somewhere or something like that, or will it
No.
wait until the terminal operation?
Yeah, it will actually wait for the terminal. So it always goes in a 3-phase kind of a thing. So yeah, we can stop, but it will always, based on the one which we have used. So it will be returning a stream only. So stream, after I do a stream, so it actually turns me a stream object, right? So stream of something, some X value here. So it will be in this state, right? So if I want, I can collect it, but that doesn't make much of a thing. So but usually, let's say my requirement is to get them as a list or something, then I'll proceed it accordingly.
Okay. So are you aware of garbage collection in Java?
Yeah. So garbage collection is a way wherein we clean up the whole memory, right? So let's say we had C and C++, we have to do the deallocation, malloc, and then we have the deloc, right? So we were taking care of the deallocation and handling of all the pointers here and there. There were scenarios where memory leaks used to happen. But yeah, talking of the garbage collection, so it came into the picture and ensure that okay, all we don't really have to do it from our end, but JVM does the garbage collections, and every time any object goes out of the scope, right? From the heap, the JC kicks in and it will clean it up from the heap, right? So let's say I have let's say I have some now again there can be two scenarios. So there can be the weak references and then we can have the strong references. So when I say weak references, let's say I have a method something, and inside that I have just use this new of something here, and I've created something. So this is a weak reference. So these kind of things can be collected a lot faster. But then we have the other strong references. So strong references are more like we have let's say a class something object is equal to new something something, right? So this is a strong reference. So let's say this object basically goes out of the scope, this in from the stack, the reference goes off, the value still will be there in the heap, so we can that is something the JVM cleans off. So let's say we want to request the JVM to have they run the JC. We can do system.gc. So this is a method. Again, this is only a request and not a order kind of a thing. So it can take it and it cannot take it, and it's up to use the JVM. And then we also have the finalize method. So this is a method which always gets executed, before finalizing the. So let's say I just want to do something, some operation I want to do, I can do it here, but not really recommended to do either of them usually.
Okay. Right. And have you used any profiling tools like JProfiler or something like that?
The profiler tool, which we actually don't use the profiler tool, and in order to get all the performance metrics, right? So what we do is we have two things right? So we have the like our project actually uses Dynatrace, right? So Dynatrace is more into APM tool, right? So it actually pretty much shows everything, to the class level. Debugging also we can do it from that, and that is something which mostly the DevOps team take care of, but again we do have the access to it, so we can actually look into it, and if any issue or something, let's say the transactions are taking a lot more time and all, right? So that is something can be taken care from there. And also we have the applications insights, so that is more like a logging and tracing facility that is given by Azure. So each trace we can see, and it is pretty much like a manager there. So we can see the transaction, how much time it is taking and all that. Right. So.
Okay. What are generics in Java? What is your understanding on generics?
Generics, yes, they are, they are pretty much like placeholders, which will, ensure there is a lot more, code reusability. So let's say, I have a generic. So generic basically they will come in the greater and smaller to inside that I'll specify the type, what it can take. So let's say the class can be generic, a method can be generic, and the values it can take, they can also be generic. Mostly you can see the generic, in map and in the list and all. We have the list, and inside the brackets we, if we see the implementation, we have T or E or something like that. So it's shows that okay, any value based on the when the loading happens, based on what is the incoming value, I place it here and then use it accordingly.
Okay, fine. And coming to the architecture kind of things, the design and low-level, high-level designs or database designs or something. So are you involved in those kind of design stuff, or is there someone else who, like your team lead or architect, does that, and only the coding part comes to you?
Yeah, so talking of those things, yeah, these are something, okay, I'll tell you how the project goes in. So we have a sprint system wherein we have, in a month we'll be having 4 sprints. 3 will be the developing one, and the last one will be the testing, integration, and stability enhancements and all. So in the first 3, let's say a requirement comes in, so we'll be provided with the LLD, and the whole, designing is something again that is taken care by the architects. So mostly the code, but yeah, so the kind of functionality which I want to take, that is one liberty given to me, and the approach I want to take, that is also with me only. So they'll just explain me the okay, this is what your code should be doing, right? And you have to know whom to contact from the UI side in order to do the integration, right? And we'll be given our deadlines, and we are free to do the way we want to do it, and then we'll deliver the solution accordingly.
Okay. And what about any non-functional requirements, any performance or security related work you have done, and like helped in improving any non-functional requirements or something in your project?
Yeah, so talking of the non-functional requirements, we do have, so yeah, so let's say even after 3 months of development, we'll have a stability phase wherein we'll be checking up, the stability of our application, and there will be some security patches going in and out, right? So there can be scenarios where the QA does certain testing and all, and they are they have found some security loophole or something like that. So in those scenarios, yes, we are given those APIs. We have to ensure that we are properly authorizing them. So we always go with the pre-auth and all, right? And we have to check the right role should get the access, right? So these kind of security patches, yes, we have worked on it. And again, we do have the other side of it. So that is the code quality analysis, wherein we have to write the test cases and all, and ensure that the percentage shoots up to 80, 85, something like that, right? And
Okay,
yeah.
so coming to the test cases, right? Have you written unit test cases like in your project?
Yeah. Every after every development cycle, that is something we have to take up. So, and we will be responsible for the code which we have written. So let's say I wrote a piece of code, and the service now, again, after my commit, the percentage drop down. So we have this Sonar Cloud, so wherein the percentage will be shown. So I have to, let's say, my the benchmarking numbers will be like 80 to 85%. So I have to write the test cases. So yeah, we have used the JUnit, and we also so there are instances wherein we have to do some inter service calls, or we have to do some DB related stuff, right? So in order to do that, we have actually used this simulation. So we go with the Mockito, right? And then there were certain scenarios, because Azure, right, most of the classes are final there. Let's say I'm using some Azure SDK, so those classes are final, so I cannot directly go with Mockito. So in those scenarios, we go with the Power Mockito, and write the test case accordingly.
Okay. And are you involved in any integration testing, automation, something like that?
Yeah, I was involved in the performance testing and the integration testing, right? So because what happens is we do have a performance testing team, but we have to sit with them, and okay, I'll come to that. Integration testing, yes. So how it actually happens is the project is completely working in a DevOps way of doing things. So everything is set up, everything is pretty much automated. We don't have to raise tickets for the builds and all that. I deployed my code within, once that pipeline is done, I can see my changes in the screen, and then I can actually work. So once all the all the development activities are done by, let's say, various other developers who are along with me, and the UI integration, everything is done. So what we will do is, now we'll start from the scratch of that particular operation. So let's say I have to create one SP, then it should come to some admin, and then some transactions. So all these various developers would have worked, but again, once everything is committed, we'll do the integration testing that way from the UI only, right? And also, yeah, coming to the performance testing, so we do have a team there. So they use scripting. So they use like load runner. Like I was back then, I was doing the same thing. So I have quite insights to it. So yeah, they use load runner. So wherein they will be developing the automation script to simulate certain transactions. So let's say I'm logging in, then I'm going to some other screen and all that, right? So these will be then captured, and a report will be made, wherein for each transaction they will be giving me the response time. The same will be shared with the client, and then we have a meeting. And let's say I have developed a piece of code which is actually taking a lot more time, then I have to further down the street optimize it or something like that. So that's the way.
Okay. So have you used any of these tools like Spark, Hadoop, Flink, or GraphQL, any data processing kind of tools have you used?
No, not really.
Okay, no issues. I'm just checking out like what are the things you have used and not used. Okay. So and for production support, right? Are you been involved in any production support kind of thing? Any bug fixes? Any server side troubleshooting? And monitoring of any products production system.
So in this project, the one which I am right now working, it is actually in midway of development, so we don't really have a production right now. But yeah, in my previous Walmart projects, I was working. We did have a lot of code smells and all. So like from the QA team, we will be getting a list of bugs which we are supposed to fix. Each of the bug will be then randomly delegated to us, and we have to go through it. and find out, okay, understand the requirement, okay, what exactly is the requirement, and then resolve it. And most of the times, even in my project, let's say we do have a UAT environment, so it's more like the production. So we do have the integration of that particular environment with the Dynatrace. So we can actually see all the logs if anything is failing, any service is down or something like that, right? So that that's there.
Okay. Talking about logs, right? So have you used any log management tools? Like how do you like go through the logs and other stuff?
Yeah, so
Log
for
exploit.
logging, so we have like in our project we have used the application insights. So I'll give you one example. So the whole project is basically structured in a SOA way of doing it. So we have a service oriented architecture, right? So we'll have a master service and we have the other services. So these particular services, right, they will be having the master service jar as a dependency. So every time I request from this jar, so there are many functionalities, right? Many utility functionalities will be available in this jar. So example can be the logger. So we have the API logger. So what exactly it internally does is it will send each log to my apps inside. So let's say there is in the controller and in the service layer implementations, everywhere we'll have the logs, right? So we do the log info and all that, and the same will be reflected in my application inside. So I just have to open it, open the right environment, and then I can see the whole trace. So we do yeah, so there is one scenario wherein, let's say, have a service call from one service to the other and to the third one, and something went wrong in it, right? So in normal we do, let's say, use the histories and all, so we don't have the circuit breaker here. So what we do is we have application inside, so it will actually show me the trace, the whole complete trace, as well as it will have the correlation ID. So that's like something we'll be setting trace ID, right? And something goes wrong there, then I can just see that, and then I can debug it accordingly. So that's with the logging. Your voice is not coming.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, yeah.
Okay. So coming to the DevOps side, right? Like what is the repository you've been using in your project? Version controlling.
For version controlling, yeah, so we have okay, let me tell you the deployment, how it is actually happening. So we have our application services which will be brought down to jars, and then we have the Docker. So we use the Docker file, so that's like a manifest file, and then we just build, we do the Docker build command, and then we give this particular file which will create the image. So we have the Azure Container Registry. So what actually it does is it will store those values, in those images in a hierarchical way. So the latest build will be on the top, and it will be then picked up from the container registry and then deployed over an AKS. So inside the AKS we have again the web apps. So web apps is for hosting those applications, right? So this is the deployment network, and yeah. So we do have the container registry, right? So that holds all the Docker files, right? So these are the Docker images, and we can just deploy it.
Okay. Okay. And I was talking about like the repositories like SVN or Git or something like that.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I've used
yeah.
what is the one?
Yeah, so we use the Git. So actually we have Azure Git. So they are internally actually using Git only. So we do some transactions on it. Let's say clone and pulls and all that, pushing and all.
Okay. And what is the build tool you have been using?
Maven.
Maven. Okay. So what are the commands in day-to-day basis? Like what are the things you'll be using in Maven?
So Maven commands, yes. So let's say I'm using the ID which we are recommended to use is the IntelliJ. So we have various Maven commands. So we call it the lifecycle, Maven lifecycle, wherein we have the test, we have the compile, we have deploy, right? We have run, right? So these are the commands which we'll be using. So let's say I just want to test it and just see the coverage or something like that. Then I'll go with the Maven test and see all test cases are passing, failing, or whatsoever. And also we have the compile to package. We also have the Maven package. It will package into the jar file based on the one which I specified in my form. right? So yeah, these are the basic commands. Yeah, yeah, yes.
So for CI/CD, what?
For CI/CD, Azure actually provides DevOps itself as a solution, right? So we have the Azure DevOps, right? So again, we have a DevOps team which takes care of it. So I was like involved previously back then, so I do have some insights to it. So how actually it happens is we will have the agent jobs. So agent jobs are nothing but basically the pipelines, right? So in the pipeline, I'll be having various stages. So starting with creating that particular image, and then like actually there will be webhooks also. So those webhooks will be basically pulling my Git, right? That's my repository, wherein if any new changes happen, so the trigger will happen there, and then it will take the file, it will make build the image, put it in the container registry. Okay, in between we also have the test, we have the Sonar Cloud also, so those transactions will be also done. And after that, once the image is created and put in the registry, get it and then deploy it, right?
So
So
you have used Sonar as well,
yeah,
like for the
Sonar Cube, yeah.
okay, Sonar
And
Cube. Okay. And have you done any POCs which has gained any traction from your teammates or the managers?
yeah, so not exactly in this project, but back then, because this project is already so okay. Every single task which I do is pretty much like a POC. Okay, yeah, I remember one. Yeah, there was one scenario. So that scenario, what actually was the requirement is there is a blob storage in Azure, so we have a lot of blob storages there. So I have to go to the blob storage. The client will put some, software file, which has to be, again then installed in the device. So my code should get triggered if a new file comes into that particular storage, and then, take it and, unzip it and put it in some other location, right? So when we started out with this, so we use the function apps. So they get triggered on, certain actions. So blob trigger is something if any change is done to the blob, that we have to trigger this the whole function. So the idea was to take the file, stream it, and then put it in, unzip it and put it in some other location, right? So what actually was the problem was, whenever I'm putting some file in it, what it actually internally does only for specific to Java, it takes the whole file and puts it in the JVM, right? So let's say the file is 500 MB, my JVM throws the out of memory exception and all. So we are facing those issues there, and function app was part of the LLD there, right? So so what we did is, I took up the other approach. I started using the logic apps, right? So logic apps are more like, these are again the serverless solutions. So again, there was another way of doing it, so I took another approach, and then I was able to give a solution. So then we finalized that and proposed to the client, and they accepted it. So yeah, that is something which I did recently. And yeah, back then I have done POCs. So I have, when I was in the like my Walmart projects and all, we created POCs, wherein even my migration project of DevOps was a POC for the client, right? Wherein we took up the modules and then created the pipeline, and then we showed them, okay, this is possible. So Kubernetes is the one which I took up as my understanding. So I implemented the whole auto scaling thing, so that we call it the horizontal pod auto scaling, right? So these were some things which I did back then. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And have you done any certifications specific to your stream?
Yeah, yeah. So most of the certifications are from Wipro, right? So we do have a lot of, so we have something called as the TrendNext points, where we get points based on the certifications and the courses we attend, and also these points actually help us grow band wise. So there will be B1, B2, and all. So certain points are required to take up the promotions. So yeah, I have done some certifications. So starting with the DevOps certification, so that was almost like a month course, wherein we have to present our own solution, right? I mean, go through the whole course and then present our own, do a capstone kind of a project, and then showcase it, right, to the managers, and then get approval and all that. And then there was the SDET. So SDET is a a certification which is more like a software developer as a as a testing kind of a thing. So wherein we will be taught a lot of tools and technologies. So all the aspects of testing, automation, the performance and security and all that. Also, and we'll have a lot of things, because that was as a part of my joining days. But yeah, so that was something I did. Now I have done the Azure certifications, so that's the AZ900, right? So yeah, these are the ones which
Okay. Okay, fine. Okay, finally, I just want to understand your like knowledge on few things. Okay, I would not like go to in deep into any of those. Just wanted to know like your understanding on cloud and microservices. Like, so you have been working very frequently on cloud, right?
Yeah.
So you said Azure. You have been working on that, and microservices, design patterns, and other stuff. Are you aware of those?
Yeah, so starting with the microservices. So when I say microservices, again, it's simply breaking down of big solution to services, wherein one service will be specific to its tasks. Yeah. So the way
Sorry,
we
sir. Just to give information, like I don't want to go into the details of it. I'm just I just want to evaluate few sections. Like
okay.
You are aware of the RESTful APIs, right? And because if I want to suggest you for the next level, right? I just want to know if you are aware of few things, so that I can suggest you to the next level where you will be interviewed for the other things, right? So I just don't want you to put in some situation or something like that. I just That's the reason I just wanted to know like your awareness about the cloud and microservices, and you have been working in the microservices environment, right? Like more than 2 years or something like that, right? Okay. That is what I just wanted to like just confirm from you. Thanks for that. Okay, and yeah, and I think I'm done with the interview. So maybe you can ask any questions if you have.
Yeah, I do have questions actually. So I just want to understand, because this will be my second leap, right? So I really want to make it big, because this is my second company which I'll be joining. So Sapient being one of the finest organizations to join. So how exactly is the work culture in terms of technical point of view, and um, from the life and work balance, and right, and or if any further improvements you want me to make, so that might help me grow as well, right? So you can.
Okay. I think you have like 2-3 questions inside that. I will take one after the other. Okay. So firstly, coming to the work environment, technical and non-technical, right? So basically, you'll be hired for a pool, and then you'll be put into a client. So you'll be working under a specific client. So coming to the technologies and other stuff, so all our clients are like using all the latest technologies, cloud native environments and other stuff. So there we don't have any issues with that. And coming to the work culture and other stuff, here it depends on the clients, but at the Sapient level the work culture is very good here. Not only the technical aspects, even the other aspects, like all your interests are taken care. Suppose if someone is interested in dancing, someone is interested in singing, so for everything they have different clubs, and for every event, maybe like Rajyotsava, Women's Day or something like that. So for everything they have like many events coming up, right? And if you are interested in, you can enroll and you can be part of it. So that way, it's not only kind of work related stuff, even the other extracurricular things you have, if you are interested in, it's like very kind of a big platform you'll be getting for that, right? And